So,
Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. Oop. Well, it jumped ahead. We'll go back real quick. Get to the beginning. I apologize about that. And here we go. Ellen, is my screen showing? Alan, can you see my screen?
yes, it is showing, Beth. It is showing, Beth.
All right, great. Thank you very much. All right, let's get started. So the opening slide made the statement, like no others on earth. And you're probably wondering, really? Does Michigan have anything that special? Yes, we do. There are dunes in Alaska, and of course there's dunes on the west and east coast of the United States, and we have dunes in Colorado and also New Mexico. But those in Michigan truly stand out. In fact, thanks to the Great Lakes, our dunes are even visible from outer space. The processes that created our Michigan dunes, the life that lives on them, and the fact that they are supported at their margin by a freshwater inland lake distinguishes them from dunes elsewhere in the world. More than half of our dunes in Michigan are in public ownership. This means they belong to you. We have an extensive public park system in Michigan, which ensures that you and future generations will have access to our sand dunes and our shoreline. Now, this slide here is a view from the Sleeping Bear Dunes. And oftentimes people outside of the state of Michigan, when they think of our sand dunes, they immediately think of Sleeping Bear Dunes because it's that iconic place that gets a lot of national recognition. Now, no two dune areas are exactly alike, and I will emphasize that often. And the dunes at Sleeping Bear Dunes are nothing like the dunes that we have at Hoffmaster State Park where I work. In fact, the Sleeping Bear Dunes are what we call perch dunes. It's a rocky moraine which the wind has perched sand up on top of, and that is what gives them their exceptional height. So let's talk about where dunes are located. Well, we have dunes all throughout Michigan, the lower and upper peninsula. This red star here on this image of the lower peninsula is where I am in Muskegon at PJ Hoffmaster State Park. Now, we have dunes throughout both, dunes are found throughout the Great Lakes, and we have dunes in both of our peninsulas. I can't emphasize that enough. But you see certain concentrations. And of course, we have quite a few dunes here along our Lake Michigan shoreline. And we're going to talk about what some of the things that brought that about, why we see these concentrations of dunes in certain locations. So dune formation can be simple or it can be complicated. If you look at each dune site individually and follow the research, you quickly learn that each location formed in its own time and space and under its own set of circumstances. However, there are common threads throughout. In the simple version, the right ingredients had to come together to form our sand dunes, and I have that list there at the top of the slide. How dunes formed involves that short list, and I think you're all very familiar with those items. First, I want to talk about water, and particularly rivers and how important they are to our dune story. Now here, most of us can visualize a river. Me saying the word river, you wouldn't even need probably to see this slide. And most of us are very familiar with rivers because there are so many of them in Michigan where we're so rich with water resources. What do rivers carry with them besides water and fish? Yes, lots and lots of sand. This image here is of the Pentwater River, Pentwater Lake, and then the lake flowing out to Lake Michigan. And if you look here on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see these dark bands in the image. And those dark bands is sand, and it's being redistributed by longshore currents and waves. you can see actually, and I apologize that Brad Reed's name is there, but I have special permission to use his slide as long as I identify that it belongs to him. And this is the way he sent it to me. But if you can look at here, just under the A of his name, you'll see this dark band there, and that's actually the sand flowing out the river. So water is a major transport system of sand. And it's a very, very important to our dune story. And I like to think of rivers as being giant conveyor belts moving sand forward into Lake Michigan. All right, so although dunes have been forming and changing since the glaciers melted 10,000 years ago, dune formation kind of accelerated around the 3,000 to 4,000 year mark, when Lake Michigan, known as Lake Nipissing, was a much bigger lake. At that time, Lake Michigan was 25 feet higher than it is today. And we have high water on Lake Michigan at this time, and imagine 25 additional feet. Very large lake. So to give you a chance to kind of visualize what that might have looked like, I'm going to take my pointer here and go to this image on the left. And I want you to notice how we have this map here of a few embayment lakes along the Lake Michigan shoreline and the rivers that flow into those lakes. And if we were to take a pencil and connect the river mouths, that would give us the old shoreline of Lake Michigan at the time that it was known as Lake Nipissing, when dune development really got going. At that time, when the lake level was this much higher, the rivers flowed directly into Lake Michigan. It didn't pass through another body of water. Now I want to talk a little bit about the development of those embayment lakes. So here in the right-hand side, the top image, and I apologize, this is not a real clear image. It's an old graphic, and therefore technology has changed so much that it doesn't come through perfectly, but it does illustrate my point. So here, the image at the top right-hand side shows the river flowing out into Lake Michigan, and the river mouth is wide there. All right, so rivers, being fast-moving bodies of water, have no trouble carrying the sand load. But when the river connects to Lake Michigan, when that river water flows out the mouth of the river and hits the quiet, relatively quiet water of Lake Michigan, it's kind of like hitting a wall. And if you were riding your bicycle and you hit a wall with your bike, you wouldn't go through the wall. The wall stops you. And that same principle applies here. So this fast-moving body of water, the river carrying the big sand load, it hits that quiet water of Lake Michigan, and the sand stops. It settles out. And that's what we see here in the image in the middle, that the sand started to build up around the edge of the river mouth. Sandbars actually formed just under the water. And as the lake level dropped over time, it exposed those sandbars to the wind. And the wind redistributed sand grains, added more sand, and sand dunes began to form around the river mouth, eventually cutting off the river from the big lake and forming these beautiful embayment lakes that we have today all along our Lake Michigan shoreline. All right, so these aerial photos of Hofmeister State Park show 5 or more generations of sand dunes that formed as lake levels dropped. Hofmeister State Park is known as a complex dune system because of this stacking effect. And here you can see dune on top of dune on top of dune in this upper left-hand image. The dunes are just stacked on top of one another. The highest dune in the park is 72 meters high, and it's down here in this area on the northern end of Hofmeister. So Hofmeister State Park is known for our large parabolic dunes, and that is an image that you can see here on the right of this parabolic dune here. They can also be thought of as being saddle-shaped dunes. That's a good way to describe the word parabolic. And we have 8 large parabolic dunes in the park. And that is really what Hofmeister is known for, but also for this forest cover. Now, when you look at these images, do you see more sand or more trees? Well, we see more trees, don't we? Yes. So that is an indication that this park has been left undisturbed for a long period of time. And the sandy dunes have evolved into grass-covered ridges, and then eventually more and more plants grew there, and it became forested. So in the absence of fire and excessive wind damage and other types of disturbances, dunes will over time become more and more forest covered. Now, dunes are supposed to change. That's something that most people don't realize. Dunes are disturbance-driven systems, and they're supposed to change over time. So let's move on and finish talking about dune formation. So now that we understand the importance of water to our dune story, let's take a look at some of the other things that had to come together. And if we had a recipe for sand dunes, what would be the other ingredients? Well, yes, of course, sand, because that's the main ingredient, right? And Michigan's beach sand is a distinct combination of minerals. So it's different than sand you find in Florida. It's 94% quartz and lesser quantities of feldspar, garnet, calcite, hornblende, magnetite, and others. What else moves sand? Well, wind. Wind is the energy that, and those prevailing westerly winds in Michigan, wind is so important to aiding in the formation of dunes and had a lot to do with why we have concentrations of dunes in certain western facing portions of our state. So let's take a look at the power of wind. So wind is the energy that moves sand and can pile it up. And let's take a look at how the wind on this day was moving the sand. So what holds dunes together? Well, if you look in this slide here, you can see something growing all around the edges of this parabolic dune. So plants and their roots are like the thread that binds it all together and gives dunes their characteristic shape. And there's one more thing in our dune recipe, and that's time. And this is something we cannot forget, because dunes do not grow overnight. It takes a long time for them to form. And dunes, remember, dunes have been evolving and changing since the glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago. Now, this is the dune here that I see when I look out my office window. And when you think about the length of time that dunes have been on Earth, you know, to us humans, you know, a few thousand years is a very long time. This dune here in particular, because of the research that's been done on the park, we know it's under 1,000 years old. But even 1,000 years old seems like a very long time to you and I. But in terms of geology, and when you think about the age of mountain ranges and rivers and other landforms in our country, a few thousand years is a very young landform or formation. So dunes are very young landforms. They have not been on Earth as long as rivers or mountains and other features. Now, let's take a look at the dune zones and habitats. So we're going to transition from formation and talk more about some of the life forms and things that we find in the different habitats of the dunes. I do want to emphasize something though with this slide. And if you look at the image on the right, you can see people climbing the dune here. And this is a dune in the park that's very popular with school groups and other visitors. It's right at the end of one of our main trails coming from the visitor center. And some people say, gosh, look at the erosion those people are causing. Oh yeah, the handprints and the footprints are there, but they won't be there tomorrow because the wind's going to erase them. And remember, dunes are disturbance-driven systems, so they can withstand a little bit of a change, you know? And so, yes, humans can cause erosion in certain trail areas in the park, especially in the back dune forest on the sensitive forested slopes. But in the open facing, westerly facing dunes, like this parabolic dune here, those footprints and the impact of those people will be gone the next day. All right, so the first dune habitat is the beach. That's the ribbon of sand between the first dune and the water. The beach can be narrow or it can be wide depending on the lake level. Right now our beach is pretty narrow. There are very few animals here. And if you look at that image on the right, I'm sure you would agree with me. There doesn't look like too many places to hide, and there isn't any food there. Nothing for an animal to eat. So very few animals or plants can actually live on the beach because of the extreme temperatures, the wind, the constant changes, the waves, and like I said, a lack of food. All living things need some food. Now this image on the left shows kind of a neat phenomenon with our Michigan beach sand. And remember when I was talking about the minerals, I mentioned magnetite. So this image on the left shows the black sand. And that is just one of the minerals in our sand, magnetite. And when the wind and the waves are sifting and sorting sand grains, it will often leave the magnetite behind because it's a heavier mineral and it's more difficult for the wind to move it. And the wind has to be moving more than 25 miles an hour to really get off all that off the beach. People often comment at the visitor center, oh, you have an oil spill on your beach, but it's just the magnetite. And if you take a magnet to it, it will actually pick up the magnetite. It is magnetic. So the second habitat of the dunes is the foredune. And this is where the grasses and the plants are holding down the sand and keeping it from blowing around. And it's actually the marram grass, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, that really gets the dune building here. I like to think of foredune as being the first dune because F-O-R-E means first. So I always think of it as being the first dune. So let's talk about the marram grass. It's the main dune building grass. It is really tough. It has narrow leaves, which protects it from the sun and allows for the wind to pass through it easily. It has very deep roots. And if you look over here in this image on the right-hand side, you'll see the roots here where this dune is somewhat eroded and the roots are really showing. When the grass is buried by sand, it just simply grows taller in the sun and its roots extend deeper. This helps to build the dune upward. Marram grass slows the movement of sand, adds nutrients to the soil and also moisture so that other plants can grow there. So let's take a look at marram grass and its habitat. I want you to notice how the wind passes through the narrow leaves easily. All right, so another thing about the marram grass is the fact, like all dune plants, it is light in color. Dune plants tend to be very light in color. It's kind of like built-in sunscreen. By not being so dark, they don't absorb quite as much light. And you know, they're growing in a very hot, dry place, so they have to retain as much moisture as possible. So are dunes still forming today? Yes, foredunes form when lake levels are low and beaches are wide. And I want to show you a graphic from the visitor center that depicts this because some of us are really better visual learners, and this will help you understand how the dune builds upward.
The ability of our coastal dunes to grow in place rather than blowing away in the wind is the result of a remarkable plant, marram grass. Like a snow fence, the grass catches blowing sand, becomes buried, then grows through the new sand, thus holding the formation in place. This process is most active when the lake level is low, the beach is wide, and the sand supply is highest. Over 30 years, a dune may grow to a height of 10 feet. In sheltered locations, rows of these low dunes exist, reflecting the change in lake levels over time.
I always like to show that because when we talk about dune formation, we're always talking about it in a historical context. But we also need to understand that dunes are still forming today. I mean, the foredunes are constantly forming and washing away and forming again. All right, so once the marram grass has held down the sand and added moisture and nutrients to it, other plants can grow there. And I'd like to show you this, which is one of my favorites, the hairy cocoon. Now you'll notice the slide, or the image rather, on the right-hand side, upper right-hand side. You can see the narrow leaves, and those narrow leaves are less surface area for water evaporation. Those leaves are also covered with really fine little hairs, which helps reflect light away from the plant's leaves. It's kind of like when you wear sunglasses and the sun can't get through to your eye, it shelters your eye. So those little hairs are kind of like sunglasses for the plant and protects its leaves from too much light. Now the flowers on this plant also have an important adaptation for water retention. They are very waxy. So if you were to feel them, they would feel just like the surface of a candle. They're waxy, and that also helps hold in moisture. And we see hairy cocoon in June usually. And another early summer plant that we see out in the dunes is the pitcher's thistle. And pitcher's thistle is a special plant. It too has very narrow leaves and those fine downy hairs all over it. And as you can see, it's extremely light in color. All adaptations for surviving in such a hot, dry place. Pitcher's thistle is a threatened species in the Great Lakes. It's endemic to the Great Lakes, so you don't find it in other regions of the country. And it has an extremely long taproot for finding water. It has state and federal protections. We have quite a lot of pitcher's thistle in Hofmaster State Park. It has a lot to do with those parabolic dunes and some of the disturbance that people create there when they walk and hike and play on the dunes. Hands and feet can create little depressions in the sand, which then can collect water when it rains, and it provides a moist place for a pitcher's thistle seed to land and then germinate. So pitcher's thistle needs some disturbance around to help it survive. And dune plants tend to have seeds that float. And that is an important adaptation because if a big wave washes up and washes you away, at least your seeds will float and can be tossed back on the beach by a wave at a later time. All right, let's talk about some of the animals that we see in the foredune area. And this is a sand wolf spider. And sand wolf spiders are not web building spiders. They don't build webs in the traditional sense. This image here on the lower right-hand side, you can see there's kind of a hole in the ground there. There is some webbing around that. Wolf spiders build burrows, and they use their burrows as a place to hang out and hope that an insect falls in. But more importantly, they use it when it's too hot to be walking on the sand or it's too cold for their fragile bodies to be out and about. They are light in color to blend into their surroundings, so they have that perfect camouflage. They look just like the sand. And yes, they can be very large, like these images are portraying. Finding one that would fit in the palm of your hand is not unlikely, but they could be teeny tiny too. And the little young ones will hang on to their mother's back, and the mothers carry them around on their backs. And we see those little baby young wolf spiders in the dunes, and they're so small, the only time you see them is when they start moving. So the hairs that cover their bodies are important thermal protection from the heat. So they have, just like the plants, they have important adaptations which help them survive in the hot place. Now let's talk about hognose snake. Snakes are one of my favorite things. They play an important role in our habitats in our special places like Hoffmaster State Park. And the hognose snake is an eater of toads. That's his main job. When he's a young snake, they eat grasshoppers and insects. As they grow, they eat mostly toads. Now, to be able to find the toads, which often hide under the sand, the hognose has a nose that points upward. And you can see in this image here in the upper left-hand corner how the hognose's nose points upward, much like a shovel, which helps it shovel through the sand looking for toads to eat. Now, this image on the lower right-hand corner, where my pointer is, you'll see this hognose snake. It's got its head flattened out. They're also known as sand cobras or puff adders or blow snakes. Now you gotta remember, a snake lives its whole life only about an inch off the ground. Everything looks larger than they are, and they get easily frightened. And so this snake has certain built-in defenses that it uses to try to scare intruders away. And it will flatten its head out, and it will huff and puff and act like a cobra, or it reminds people of a cobra. And that if that can scare the person away or the enemy, the dog or whatever's bothering the snake. And if that doesn't work, they usually roll over and play dead. Now they're light in color, which helps them blend into the sand. And they're a fun snake to find in the park and when you're out hiking. They're harmless. All right, so let's talk about a very special bird that we see on the beach and in the Fore-Dune region and sometimes around our interdunal ponds, which we're going to talk about next. So piping plovers are critically endangered in the Great Lakes region. And this is despite a recovery from only 17 nesting pairs in 1986 to over 75 nesting pairs a day. Now, teams of experts develop solutions to increase their numbers. We don't want this bird to go extinct. And so we have plover watchers that babysit the nest in the spring and summer and chase off predators, keep people out of the nesting areas. And it takes a lot of individuals and many different kinds of strategies to keep this bird from going extinct and disappearing from our Great Lakes region. Human activity can disturb plovers and cause them to abandon their nests. And the biggest things that disturb plovers, the biggest threats to them are unleashed dogs, ORVs, fireworks, and kites. Kites flying over the beach cast a shadow and make the plover afraid that there might be a hawk stalking them or some other large bird predator. All right, now we're going to talk about our third dune habitat, and that is the interdunal pond. And I have these images here of ponds at Ludington State Park, which is, whenever I think of the place that has the most iconic interdunal ponds, I think of Ludington State Park. These are shallow ponds. They can be full of water in the spring and be a little deeper and then dry up by midsummer when we have lots of sun and heat. These ponds form wherever the wind has scoured away the sand down to the groundwater level and the depression fills with the groundwater. They can be temporary ponds, they can be more permanent. It just depends on the lake level, it depends on how much precipitation we get, etc. They are, of course, most full in the spring, and then they start to dry up as summer goes on if we don't get enough rain. They are very, very important to amphibians and reptiles. And the amphibian I have pictured here is the Fowler's toad. And Fowler's toads are found in the southern half of Michigan, primarily along the lake and the west side of the state. They're one of my favorite amphibians. All right, so let's talk about the fourth dune habitat, and that is the back dune forest. And if you remember back to the images, the aerial images of Hoffmaster State Park, I said that most of Hoffmaster was a back dune forest. So behind the Fore-Dune and interdunal pond is a tree line that begins the back dune forest. Here is the greatest variety of plant and animal life. In Hoffmaster State Park, this of course is our dominant habitat, and we have over 30 species of birds that live 300 species of birds that live there, and over 30 different species of mammals that live in the back dune forest. Do those animals stay in the back dune forest? No, most of the animals will go down to the water for a drink and they pass through the other habitats, but in the back dune forest is where there's the greatest amount of shelter and the greatest variety of food. Now I want to talk about one of my favorite animals of the back dune forest, and that is the eastern box turtle. Box turtles are very special. They're a species of special concern in Michigan. Their numbers are declining due to habitat loss. So one of the greatest benefits of our state parks is that they provide protected habitat to species like the eastern box turtle. I use the box turtles at the visitor center often to teach young people about this very special species. But one of the things I like to always talk to everybody about is how much they really have in common with us people. They eat a variety of food in their diet, just like us. Now, we like chicken or steak or some other type of meat typically, but the box turtle eats meat too. It's just his favorite types would be slugs, little snakes, a toad or a frog, a dead bird he might find. Something else here, if you look at this image in the upper left hand or upper right hand corner, you'll notice the eye color. It's red. Males have red eyes, and the females, like this one down here in the lower right hand side, have brown eyes. That's one of their distinguishing features. But another thing that they have in common with people is that they have their own fingerprint. Now, I want you to look at your thumb and look at the lines in your skin. That is your fingerprint, and no two fingerprints among any of us is the same. We all have our own unique fingerprint, and so do box turtles. No two are alike. This image on the left here shows all of these different box turtles and the patterns and different color variations that you see. And the image on the right is one that I put together of all the different box turtles that I've ever found in Hoffmaster State Park. And you can see how there are no two that are exactly alike. I've always found that to be so fascinating. All right, we're going to start to wrap this up here. So dunes have many values, and they are exemplary natural communities. We've made that clear by talking about how they're different than dunes you find in other parts of the world. And our sand dunes are just much more than habitat for unique wildlife and plants. They're wonderful places to explore and to experience the very best of Michigan. They add so much to our lakeshore communities. They draw people to the lakeshore. They add to the economies of those small communities all along the shorelines of Michigan, because people like to come to the dunes and see the lake and be on the Great Lakes. So public ownership of these landscapes in our state parks especially ensures that future generations will also be able to see and explore the beauty and diversity that our dunes provide. Michigan has a strong world reputation as a leader in natural resource preservation and conservation. It is worth protecting that legacy for the future. Our decisions and actions that we make today are important to maintain the quality of these precious landforms. Michigan sand dunes are a rare gift that belong to all of us. This diverse collection of landforms along our freshwater Great Lakes has no equal in the world, and they are here for you to explore and to enjoy. I hope you will have the opportunity to visit the dunes to experience all they have to offer in every season. Hoffmaster State Park has over 10 miles of trails that provide spectacular views no matter the time of year. And with that, we're going to conclude my portion of this presentation, and I will open it up for questions.
Okay. You want me to leave this slide up here for a few minutes?
Just for a couple minutes, and I'll stop sharing in a second, but you can start the questions.
Okay, so questions we have here. We have quite a few.
Oh, really? Good.
What kind of trees grow on the sand dunes?
Well, at Hoffmaster State Park, which is pretty characteristic of, the middle part of the Lake Michigan shoreline there, we have a lot of oak, red oak and black, and maple, sugar maple mostly. We also have black cherry, but you see things like, as you get closer to the Dune area, you'll see the tree species change, and you see more sassafras and early successional trees there. And then, of course, out in the Dune, you might find cottonwood.
Okay. Someone asked me, or asked you, I should say, where is the tallest sand dune on Lake Michigan?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. Can you believe it? I just I can't think of. In Hoffmaster State Park, like I said, our biggest one is 72 meters. I guess I would have to say the Sleeping Bear Dunes. But, like I said before, you really can't compare one dune area to another very much, because they all have, they're different types of dunes. So Sleeping Bear is a perch dune, Hoffmaster State Park, our dunes are solid sand from top to bottom. So can't really give you a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, a couple more questions here. Do you have any poisonous snakes in your park?
We actually do have the Massasauga rattlesnake at Hoffmaster State Park, but it's not we never see it in the busy part of the park because that's too upland there. We'll see it on the eastern side of the park along Little Black Lake, where there tends to be some marsh areas. And I have seen them there in late summer when they kind of come up on the shore to sun, in August, to lay in the sun there. And I've seen them, seen the Massasauga along Little Black Lake.
And we'll finish up with this question. Somebody who has visited actually the Gillette Sand Dune Visitor Center. They said, I saw a live turtle at the visitor center during a past visit. What type was it and what does it eat?
Oh, well, I have several different species there. Of course, I have box turtles. I also have a musk turtle. And musk turtles you would find in the shallow waters of Hamlin Lake at Ludington State Park, where Mr. Wernette works. And they hang out, they're a real quiet turtle, and they'll eat little dead fish that they find. They very rarely will chase their own fish and catch them, but they'll also eat worms if they find them, and aquatic insects. And most turtles like some aquatic plant life to eat.
Yeah, you do have a great collection there at the visitor center.
Right.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for all the great information about the sand dunes of the Great Lakes. The webinar will be on just for a few more minutes here. Recordings of all the webinars are now available on Nature at Home. We also hope that you will take time to go to Nature at School. We do the school programs, virtual live school programs there. Also, we have the DNR Facebook page, which tells you up-to-date current things that are happening in the DNR, what kind of programs are being offered, whether virtual or actually in the park, through the DNR also. So we encourage you to go to the Facebook. So that's our program for today. I want to thank everyone for joining in, and hope you'll sign up for other upcoming webinar series and look at some of the past ones. Be sure to check out the web pages that we have too. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.